along with George Eason and some of the staff here at Passaic Valley is also involved in online here tonight. But really, this is the Historical Society's baby, and this is the first time any of us is seeing this presentation. Thank you, John.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Cardillo. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Again, I want to extend my thanks to Dr. Cardillo and to her incredible team, all of them, Patricia Palmieri and George Dassinger, and of course, Sylvester Mercado, who's helped with so much of the technical aspect. I want to thank our board as well, particularly George Eaton, our vice president, who also a Passaic Valley graduate, and he has just been incredible going through all of our archives. Just for a moment before we get started, by way of talking about the Little Falls Historical Society, the society has been around for, let's see, since 1968. So before I was born, and even before that, there was an earlier iteration of the society through the Women's Club and the library. So we have a huge database of documents that we maintain at the Little Falls Civic Center. We have offices on the second floor. And we were so happy to hear from Dr. Cardillo because our former president, former historian, who we're going to speak about tonight, Cliff Swisher, this was probably his favorite topic to speak about. And he truly waxed poetic about Passaic Valley High School and the years that he had at Passaic Valley High School. And he was there from the very, very beginning. So it's my honor to give this from a personal standpoint. My parents attended, mom having graduated in '64, relatives, cousins, myself in 1987, my sisters, cousins, so generations of family that have attended this great institution known as Passaic Valley Regional High School. And with that said, I would like to open up the presentation and just by way of, how we're going to go about the night, I welcome questions. I like interruptions. I don't like a static presentation. So if something comes up, I believe there is a mechanism here for you to raise your hand. And if there's not, we'll try to unmute yourself or wave your hand and we'll get the idea. And I do have some questions for the group as well. So with that said, Sylvester, if you would call up the presentation. All right, so the first slide, this is the original, very regal looking logo of Passaic Valley Regional High School. This is long before the Hornet, which we will speak about later in the presentation. Okay, next slide. Okay, this I love. I believe the original is hanging in the auditorium. Dr. Cardillo, you can correct me, or it's somewhere in the building. We have copies of it, but I believe the original's in the building, and it's just it's a wonderful watercolor of the original building and what it was designed to look like. And they truly spared no expense on this building. This was a very expensive building to build, and we're going to talk about that and how they laid it out and how it came about, why it was selected to be there, what additions happened over the year. But I just wanted to pause for you to look at this because it's a wonderful picture and it's something that is really special, and so much went into this presentation in terms of, looking at the history. And while we're celebrating the 80th anniversary of Passaic Valley, the story goes back. The story of a high school is really more than 100 years ago. So we're really going to take the story back to, early, maybe 1910 or before. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is our current Board of Education, and we want to thank the Board of Education as well, including Dr. Cardillo, all the members of the board, the board administrator, and our board attorney, Mr. Redden. Thank you. Okay, this is us, the historic Little Falls. I already spoke about this. We're located on Warren Street, and we have literally thousands of pictures and photos and documents documenting the history of Little Falls, dating back to its earliest roots in 1711. And we do actually have structures in Little Falls that date back even before that, the oldest property being the old Spear House, but that's not the purpose of this talk. So we just wanted to show that up there. It's a wonderful original drawing that was done in the early 1940s, showing the original falls. And that is us, the Little Falls Historic Society. Anyone interested in joining the society, it's a $25 membership, and you just send an email or send the $25 to P.O. Box 1083 Little Falls, and that entitles you to newsletters and notifications and talks such as this. All right, no more plugs to the Historic Society. Let's get into PV. All right, here he is, the man, the myth, the legend, C.E.A. Walton. You know him from the field, but his story in Little Falls dates back a very long time. Walton moved to Little Falls in 1910. Came to Little Falls in 1910, had tremendous experience and education, being an educator himself. The home that you're seeing, that home is still there in the background. That was his home, located on Lincoln Avenue at the corner of Lincoln and Walnut. And Walton was originally, if you look at what he was involved in, he was originally the principal and superintendent of the Little Falls and West Park and Great Notch and Singac schools. Remember, before 1914, there certainly wasn't a Woodland Park and there wasn't a West Patterson. There was a West Park, and that was a section of Little Falls. And the 5 schools, now the Little Falls schools were made up of Little Falls, Singac, and Great Notch, but there were also 2 schools in the West Park neighborhood, which is now present day Woodland Park. Those schools were under the jurisdiction of Walton. That it just goes to show you how long he was involved in education. Keeping in mind, back in those days, you're after the 8th grade year, the older students, more of what you would have today as the freshmen and sophomores, stayed within the school. There were classrooms. Many of them went to work and they stopped the education process. But Walton is someone that is so central to the story of education throughout the towns, at least Little Falls and West Park, West Patterson, over those years. So that is Walton. We're going to speak about him in more detail, as he was very involved many years after. You figure he came here in 1910 and the high school got built in 1940. So he was involved for a very long time, and then still played an integral role going forward as the very first president of the Regional Board of Education in 1938. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this was a photo that was, this is a very marked as a very, and it's marked, it's in with our files from the Passaic Valley file. So I can't 100% document where this is, but suffice it to say, somewhere within those grounds, that may be some little area by the PEckman River. And if you show the next slide. Okay, now you're starting to see a little bit more formation there of the area that we believe is the area of the current day Passaic Valley. Certainly back then. Now these pictures are probably going back to the very, very early 1900s, maybe even late 1800s. But, in order to really tell the story, we're going back. We're not going back to the dinosaurs, but we're going back to at least 1900 and showing this land. And we're going to talk about why the high school was why it was selected to be there. So let's go on to the next slide. Okay, as I mentioned, this is a photograph taken in 1901. That is the original school number 1. That's the Little Falls School. Remember, at those times, that school would have been kindergarten through 8th grade. But during the early years, there were rooms that were there for the older kids. So it would have been like a high school, junior high school in that building. And that, from our documentation, was from the year somewhere around 1910 through 1918, somewhere around that time. Then, after that, what would happen is the students would either be there, and then they would either, like I said, go off to work, stop their educational process, but many of them continued, and they continued either at the Patterson Central High School, which is, what the high school where Kennedy High School is now located, not the same building. And that was about, at least from the Little Falls perspectives. I don't have the numbers for Totowa or West Patterson, but from Little Falls, about 60% of the students from Little Falls then went on to either to the Patterson school systems for high school. The balance of them, maybe another 30%, went to George Innes High School in Montclair. And George Innes High School in Montclair is the building located across from the present day high school of Montclair on Park Street in Montclair. But this is a wonderful building. This building was torn down in 1950 to make way for the new school number 1. So I show this, and certainly we could show an example of the other schools in West Patterson and Totowa, and I'm sure that they had a similar situation where they had some rooms dedicated to the older children. All right, next slide. Okay, so the idea of a high school, not a regional high school. Now up to this point, this is still very much a Little Falls story. So the idea of a high school is not a new one. Walton had pushed for a Little Falls high school for a very long time. An opportunity came about to purchase land on East Main Street. And they were able to convince the members of the public by way of referendum to purchase 10 acres on East Main Street. And the site for a long period of time was known as the Little Falls High School site. There was nothing built on it for a number of years. I believe the purchase was in the earlier 20s, maybe 1922 when they purchased the land. And there was a football field located there. And I use the term field very lightly. It's certainly a far cry from what we have today on our athletic fields, but there was a field, and I believe there was a baseball field. At that time, there was also a farm located there that was not owned by the regional board, at least the Little Falls board rather. So at that point in time, they came up with a plan, and that plan, if you look at the heading here, it's cut off a little bit, but it says, beautiful new high school practically assured. So they were convinced that the voters were going to go along with putting up a building, this brand new Little Falls High School, and that's the design of the building. It shares many elements of Little Falls School number 2. If you look at the building, Little Falls School number 2, same architect. Little Falls School number 2 was built in 1923. This was designed probably in 1925 and put to referendum in 1926. So again, Walton and the entire Little Falls group, they were convinced this was happening. However, what was also going on at that time was members of the Little Falls public were finding that their school number 1 was completely inadequate for their own needs. And they were really very much focused, not that they were against the idea of the high school, but if you read, and there's, we have a lot of content about this, there was lots of interest in putting a brand new school number 1 on the site, the present day site, and not doing the high school until that was done. So of course, the board did not listen to that. And that was, one point of view. And they put it up to the members of the public, and to their shock, it was turned down. So after that, they had put that work into it. And when you read the articles from the Little Falls Reporter and the Herald, much like this article, they were really shocked and dismayed, and they didn't necessarily have a plan B. Years went by, and that led into the Great Depression, and that was a time when you were not putting up things of that nature. So that left a number of years, and there are articles from time to time over those years about the idea of reinitiating doing something about that. During this time in the 20s, there were no regional high schools. It wasn't even allowed by the state legislature. So, all right, next slide. So now this is my first question here. So each of the 3 towns had the opportunity to suggest a location. And so I'm going to ask the question and see if anyone had, let's start with West Patterson. Anyone want to venture a guess as to where if Passaic Valley were in West Patterson, where it was going to be located? Raise your hand, wave. Anyone want to venture a guess?
Dowling's farmyard.
Okay, so wait, who is that speaking?
That's Rich Sidney.
Oh, hello, Rich.
How are you?
That's a great guess. And I put it out to a few people, and that was actually my Aunt Rosemary guessed that as well. But no, that is actually not, that's not correct. Anyone else want to venture a guess? All right. I don't think we have any other hands raised. So let's go to the screen, to the next slide. All right. So the location that was selected by the Board of Education in Woodland Park with West Patterson at the time was the, well, I'll call it the current site of Singer Kierfot, which is now going through a redevelopment of its own. But at the time, that was the Idlewild Park, the amusement park that was there. And it was a large enough location. And frankly, it was the most centrally located for the three towns. When it was measured out, and for those reasons, it was actually a very good location. And I believe, but for one factor, that would have been the location of Passaic Valley. The boards of Little Falls and Totowa as well were concerned about the flooding. And they were concerned about the safety of the proximity to the Passaic River. And for those reasons, that went down. Okay, Totowa's selection. Anyone want to venture a guess on this? Come on, Rich, you might as well just venture a guess on this one as well. All right, seeing no one come forward, at least I'm not seeing anyone. Let's go to the next slide. So this is was the first Union Bank, the Wells Fargo Bank. This is Union Boulevard in Totowa, picture actually taken this morning. And it's interesting that both of those buildings now, we're talking about 80 years ago, but both the Singer Kierfot building and this building, they're both going through major redevelopments of their own. So just goes to show you that, you know, history is not, it's not static. History is living and breathing, and this will, you know, someday someone will talk about these buildings and the fact that Singer Kierfot was located in Woodland Park for all those years, and that this, you know, awesome bank, you know, mid-century bank building was located in Totowa for all these years. So this was the site that was offered up by Little Falls, and there was another site next to it that was there was a farm here. There was DeGraw's Farm, and also a nursery, you know, a plant nursery that was located there. And together, that was the first 11 acres that was used to erect the new building. But I love this picture. I think the picture is probably somewhere around 1918. And you can see, you know, just how rural the area was looking at these big lots. Okay, next slide. All right, here we are. Now you can see that this is under construction now. To me, I'm just in awe of the fact that they were able to build this building with the materials that they did, and in such a significant building, you know, designed by a very renowned architects, Fanning and Shaw from Patterson, that designed lots of buildings in North Jersey and elsewhere. And this is, we're so fortunate that we have these pictures. And this is a picture of Passaic Valley Regional High School under construction. I believe it's dated February. It's cut off because I see everyone else's picture there, but isn't that a great picture? Okay, next slide. Okay, yeah, actually the other one, this picture is actually a later picture, but it's worthy of showing the area where the auditorium is and the backside. This is before the addition from '56. I think this picture was taken in about the late, judging by the car, probably in the late 40s. Okay, next picture. All right, there's the original building, and it's just such a classic building. You have the auditorium on the one side, the gymnasium on the other side, the classroom. We're going to show you the floor plan. And I've always loved the two towers on either side. Love to see an initiative at some time in the future to rebuild those. But the front of that is really largely the same and hasn't changed since it's been built in 1940. And it's a testament to the quality of the construction that was built. And, you know, there's a quote from Walton when I guess he was given some criticism about how expensive the building was for its time, but he said that no one is ever proud of their cheap school building. So he refused to build a building with materials other than the finest of materials. And for its time, this building was very much so state of the art in terms of its electronics, in terms of its size, in terms of its library, and they really spared no expense on the building, and to think they got it done in a year is remarkable. Okay, next slide. Just another vantage point of that. I mean, you can see on that side, that's where, you know, there was an addition on that side. So that part does look different, but largely the same. That's the old gym there. We'll see some interior shots, and that is, that's showing, you know, some of the original landscapings. And there was some comments in the original 1940 file about how the architects actually took a lot of time to study where they were going to put the plantings, and even references to the fact that they wanted the building to be east to west. If you recall the photo that I showed, the lithograph of the 1926 Little Falls High School, it was very, very close to East Main Street, set up facing the road. They purposely wanted the school laid out this way because of the sun setting in the east to west direction. Okay, next slide. All right, just you know, another great picture of the school. Next slide. Okay, I think that's great. That is frame worthy. That is really a terrific detail, you know, showing the metal work of that. And we can also use this if the Board of Ed wants to look at rebuilding it. We have everything there, and we have the original architectural plans as well. All right, next slide. Okay, so this is the original auditorium with the wood chairs. I mean, that was a very large auditorium for its time. You know, previous to this, there was the Oxford Theater for those old timers in Little Falls that remember the Oxford Theater that was located in the bank parking lot, the PNC parking lot. That did actually have a stage and a theater, but it wasn't part of any school. So this was really remarkable to have a room of this size, and they took advantage of it, as we'll see, from day one, having the Valley varieties and putting on plays. And if you've ever attended any of the current day plays, they are top notch. And so that tradition has lasted all 80 years. Okay, moving on. All right, this is still here. It's an old picture, but this is the marker of the building, of course, recognizing the original Board of Education, erected in 1940. And we see Walton's name is on there. Floyd Hughes, perhaps for his voting for this location, was given the chair of Building and Grounds. And we see some other familiar names, you know, with respect to all three towns. You know, Francisco and Wright and Schooler, as well as Edward Garrison, who was the county superintendent of schools. And as I mentioned earlier, Fanning and Shaw was the original architects of this building, as well as other buildings throughout the three towns and elsewhere. Okay, moving on. I absolutely love this picture. This is this is opening day. So this is the picture. And remember, you know, these are students that had waited for their own school. And I just love the way I call this, you know, they're storming the school. And so the school was supposed to open up on the week before this. So if you read about it, it was supposed to be the week before, but they were still finishing, getting desks done and assembling things and finishing painting. I mean, that's how, you know, that's how fast they had to work to get this done and to do it the right way. But I just love that. I love that picture that we have, and it's been used. You'll see it in other yearbooks. It's been used, and I believe we have the original, although I'm not sure if this one is a copy. Okay, next slide. All right, again, this is more of the excitement of the opening and dedication. The Little Falls Herald, which was a paper, even though it was named the Little Falls Herald, it had a publication that went into the other towns as well. And they dedicated an entire edition to the dedication of Passaic Valley with inserts and advertisements and special greetings from local businesses and dignitaries and dedications. And that shows the, that shows the original building. And we have all of the original Little Falls Heralds, the newspaper before that, the Little Falls Eagle, and then, that stayed around for a long time and then merged in at one point with Patterson Evening News. But it's a great wealth of information for us on the history of not just Little Falls, but the other towns as well. Okay, next slide. All right, I don't know if you can zoom in on this slide at all, Sylvester, but that shows you the floor plan. So if you look at the, it's just such a classic. Just everything's so logical with the administration downstairs, and the corridor with the cafeteria. And if you note, there is the gymnasium, but the gymnasium was separated for boys and girls. And there was a retractable wall. Again, that was another piece of technology, a retractable wall that separated them. Another feature of the building was that the entire building was wired for sound. And that was a big deal back in 1940, that they had an intercom system throughout the entire building. And they had a very state-of-the-art sound system on the other side where you're seeing where the theater is and the auditorium. But this is the original floor plan, and it was pretty much built exactly like this. We're going to speak about modifications later on in the talk.